Welcome to Salem Witch Trials Daily. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack. Today we're stepping back to May 1690, 2 years before the infamous trials began, to look at a pivotal military disaster that many historians, including Mary Beth Norton, believe set the stage for the atmosphere of fear and suspicion in Salem.
We're talking about the fall of Falmouth and Fort Loyal. It's a story of grandiose strategies in Boston colliding with brutal reality on the Maine frontier.
It's also a story about leadership, specifically how the decisions made by men like John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, names we know all too well from the 1692 courtrooms, may have directly led to the slaughter of an entire settlement.
To understand May 1690, you have to understand the mindset in Boston. Bay Colony leaders were tired of being on the defensive. They decided to take the initiative for the first time in King William's War.
Governor Bradstreet and the council were dreaming big. They were planning an expedition against the French at Port Royal, Acadia, led by Sir William Phips. It was a public-private venture. Merchants and soldiers were actually going to split the plunder.
But while they were eyeing French gold, they were also blaming the victims of recent raids in Schenectady and Salmon Falls. Samuel Sewall actually wrote that these tragedies were caused by the settlers' own carelessness and want of vigilance.
It's a classic case of victim blaming. The council's reasoning was that if frontier residents just stayed on their guard, they could defend themselves easily. This gave Boston a convenient excuse. If something went wrong, it wasn't the government's fault. It was the settlers' unpardonable negligence.
So on April 21st, 1690, Samuel Sewall and William Stoughton set off for Manhattan in the New York colony. And on May 1st, they promised that Massachusetts would send men and arms to support a combined colonial attack on Montreal. So Stoughton and Sewall go to New York. They promise Massachusetts soldiers to be used in this offensive against Montreal instead of being on the frontier in Maine and New Hampshire to defend the settlers there. Then on April 24th, the council in Massachusetts sends John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin north to New Hampshire and Maine to investigate the situation on the frontier with the war and make recommendations about what to do with the soldiers and the security of the frontier. So when they got to Maine, they found the defenses in shambles. Some garrisons had no soldiers at all, but at Falmouth, there was a significant force of 60 men under Captain Simon Willard stationed at Fort Loyal.
Hathorne and Corwin did what they were told. They exhorted the frontiersmen to take due care so they wouldn't be surprised by the enemy, but then they made a fateful recommendation.
While no exact record of their private advice exists, the outcome is clear. The council concluded that Willard's 60 men were no longer needed in Falmouth.
Mary Beth Norton points out that if Hathorne and Corwin had strongly advocated for keeping those men there, the council likely wouldn't have pulled them out. It was a catastrophic miscalculation.
And the timing couldn't have been worse. On Thursday, May 15th, Captain Willard followed orders and marched his 60 soldiers out of Fort Loyal.
At daybreak the very next morning, a force of 400 to 500 Wabanaki and French soldiers fell on Falmouth.
We have a harrowing account from Captain Sylvanus Davis. He describes a brutal 5-day siege when the attackers burned all the houses, and finally the English had to parley.
The French promised them good quarter and liberty to march to the next English town, but as soon as they surrendered, the agreement was shattered.
Davis reported that the enemies were allowed to murder and destroy the captives, especially the wounded. The French only kept Davis and a few others to take to Canada. About 200 people were lost.
The news stunned New England. The settlements east of Wells were effectively abandoned, and refugees flooded into Portsmouth, and the mood was apocalyptic.
One New Englander wrote that God had come against them with a French axe accompanied with hatchets. Meanwhile, Thomas Danforth told the desperate Maine residents that if Jesus didn't help them, he certainly couldn't.
But in Boston, the sorrow was abated because news arrived that Phips' raid on Port Royal had been a success. There was plunder to be shared.
It's a chilling prelude to 1692. The same men who would later sit in judgment of the supposed witches, Hathorne, Corwin, Sewell, and Stoughton, were the ones whose grandiose strategies and negligence left the frontier defenseless.
The trauma of the fall of Falmouth didn't disappear. It followed the survivors and the leaders right into the meeting house in Salem.